California, a sunset-painted sky, glowing red. The ocean breeze sweeps through the lush green hills of Carmel-by-the-Sea, a place Clint Eastwood has called home for decades. But today, instead of peace, a storm is brewing. Not from nature, but from greed and power. Can one man stand against an entire empire? Can justice prevail over wealth and influence? Follow this gripping story, Clint Eastwood and the final battle for justice, only on Golden Story. Don't forget to hit subscribe to support the channel and join us in uncovering unbelievable but true stories. The threat from the powerful. The sun set over Carmel-by-the-Sea, casting a golden glow across the rolling hills. The salty ocean breeze drifted through the worn wooden gates of Mission Ranch, the historic estate Clint Eastwood had spent half his life preserving. This land wasn't just property, it was history, a legacy tied to the region for over a century. But today, that sense of peace had been shattered. A thick envelope sat on Clint's desk. Inside, a letter bore the elegant seal of Titan Industries, the massive real estate conglomerate led by billionaire Richard Coleman. Mr. Eastwood, the coastal resort project by Titan Industries is a significant step forward for the development of Carmel-by-the-Sea. We are offering to purchase Mission Ranch at a price above market value. However, should you refuse, we will take legal steps to invoke eminent domain for the greater public good. We hope you will consider this offer wisely. Clint set the letter down, raising an eyebrow. Public good, a polished phrase disguising a blatant land grab. Did they really think he would fold that easily? Soon, the warnings began. One morning, as Clint stepped onto his porch, he noticed a black car idling near the gate. Inside, two men in dark suits sat watching him. They said nothing, just sat there, observing. When Clint approached, the engine revved, and the car sped off, leaving behind an envelope stuffed into his mailbox. Inside, a simple but chilling message in bold capital letters. Don't fight what can't be stopped. Clint smirked, not the smile of a man afraid, but of someone who had faced far worse. But the pressure from Titan Industries didn't stop at veiled threats. The local government had begun to turn against him. For years, Clint had maintained a strong relationship with the mayor and city council. He had invested in historic preservation, supported environmental causes, and helped protect Carmel's cultural heritage. But suddenly, everything changed. His land permits were re-examined. A complaint surfaced that part of his ranch wasn't properly registered. A week later, he received notice from the City Planning Commission. Mission Ranch had been marked for rezoning under the proposed coastal resort project. Clint walked into the mayor's office one sweltering afternoon. William Harper, Carmel's longtime mayor, sat behind his desk, looking uneasy as Clint placed the letter in front of him. "What the hell is this, Bill?" Clint asked, his voice low and sharp. Harper sighed, avoiding Clint's gaze. "Clint, my hands are tied. Titan Industries has an army of lawyers. They convinced the council this project is for the greater good." Clint tilted his head. Convinced? Or bought them off? Harper didn't answer right away, but the way he avoided Clint's stare told him everything he needed to know. Titan Industries had the local government in its pocket. The next day, a survey team from Titan showed up at his ranch gate. They walked onto his land without hesitation, taking measurements, muttering about feasibility assessments, acting as if he wasn't even there. A middle-aged man in a gray suit approached Clint. Mark Evans, Titan's legal representative. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm afraid you're wasting your time. And I think you're trespassing." Clint shot back, arms crossed. Evans smirked. "You could sue, but we have the best lawyers in the state. And you're just a retired actor. You don't stand a chance, Mr. Eastwood." Clint locked eyes with him, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Is that so? Then we'll see about that." Evans nodded, smirking. "Enjoy your last days on this land, Mr. Eastwood." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Clint standing there. But Evans had just made a grave mistake. Clint stepped back into his house, poured himself a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it. He sat at his desk, pulled open a drawer, and retrieved a thick binder. California land law. If Titan Industries wanted to take his land, they have to fight for it. And this time, Clint Eastwood didn't need a gun. He just needed the truth. Fire the story is just beginning. Fire. Clint Eastwood versus the system. The dim glow of an old desk lamp flickered across Clint Eastwood's study. Papers, maps, and thick legal documents lay sprawled across the dark wooden table. He sat in deep thought, flipping through pages of California land law, carefully making notes in his firm, steady handwriting. Outside the window, the night in Carmel-by-the-Sea was quiet, but not peaceful. He could sense the eyes watching him from the shadows of the narrow streets. Ever since he announced his intention to fight in court, he knew Titan Industries wouldn't just sit back and let him. One afternoon, as he pored over historical records of Carmel's land, an old friend dropped by. David Reynolds, a renowned attorney who had helped Clint with legal battles in the past, walked in with a troubled look on his face. "Clint, you need to let me or a legal team handle this. Coleman has an army of lawyers ready to crush you in court." Clint set his coffee down, his eyes never leaving the page. "I know how strong Titan's lawyers are, David, but there's one thing they don't have." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Clint finally looked up, his gaze sharp as a blade. "The truth." Reynolds sighed, knowing there was no changing Clint's mind. "You're as stubborn as ever, Clint. But if this is how you want to play it, I'll help you gather evidence." Clint wasn't relying on reputation or instinct. He knew that to defeat Titan Industries, he had to prove his ownership beyond any doubt. He dug through old records, historical land maps dating back to the previous century, and legal documents confirming his rightful ownership of Mission Ranch since the 1980s. He even reached out to local historians, those who could testify that this land was an irreplaceable part of Carmel's heritage. But he didn't stop there. Clint meticulously studied past lawsuits, searching for weaknesses in Titan Industries' legal strategies. And then he found something suspicious. This wasn't the first time Titan had used public interest as an excuse to seize land. Richard Coleman, CEO of Titan Industries, wasn't a man who lost easily. When he heard that Clint was going to court without a legal team, he scoffed. The old man's delusional. "Fine. If he wants to fight, I'll teach him a lesson in reality." Titan Industries immediately launched its smear campaign. The local press, already in Titan's pocket, began churning out false reports. "Clint Eastwood has no legal proof of ownership over Mission Ranch. Mission Ranch is public land. Eastwood is occupying it illegally. Hollywood elites hoard land while the people suffer." Article after article painted Clint as a greedy celebrity blocking the town's progress. When he saw the headlines the next morning, Clint just smirked. He had seen these tricks before, but this was only the beginning. Titan didn't just attack him legally or through the media. They escalated to direct intimidation. One night, after leaving a small cafe near the harbor, Clint noticed two men trailing him. They didn't bother hiding. They wanted him to know they were there. As he stepped into a quiet alley, one of them spoke. "Mr. Eastwood, you should be careful. Land is just land, not worth spilling blood over." Clint turned slowly, his expression unmoved. "Oh, and here I thought you boys were just here for a friendly chat." The other man sneered. "Not exactly. We just want you to understand, Titan isn't the kind of company you want to mess with. Take the money. Walk away. Don't let this get ugly." Clint was silent for a moment. Then he took a step forward. "Listen, kid, I've dealt with men a hell of a lot scarier than you two. If you're trying to intimidate me, you're playing the wrong game." The air grew tense. One man glanced at the other, then shrugged. "Your choice, old man. Don't say we didn't warn you." They turned and walked away, leaving Clint alone in the darkness. He knew now, this fight wasn't just legal anymore. It was a battle for survival. Clint returned to his ranch and sat by the fireplace, staring out the window at the shadows creeping over his land. He knew they wouldn't stop, but what Titan Industries didn't know was that Clint Eastwood never backed down. Fire the War was just beginning. Fire. The sky over Carmel-by-the-Sea hung heavy today, dark gray clouds stretching across the horizon like an omen of the storm to come. But Clint Eastwood knew the real storm wasn't outside. It was unfolding in the courtroom behind closed doors among those who held power. Weeks of fighting alone had begun to take their toll. The pressure from Titan Industries was mounting, threats, smear campaigns in the media, and strangers loitering near his ranch. It was clear that Coleman was willing to do whatever it took to force him to surrender. But then, a light appeared in the darkness. That night, as Clint sat alone in his cabin, the flickering fire casting restless shadows on the wooden walls, his phone rang. "I don't have much time. If you really want to know what Titan has done, meet me. Alone." The voice on the other end was a woman's, urgent, tense. She didn't introduce herself, but Clint could hear the fear beneath her words. "Where?" he asked, his voice steady. "A small cafe in Monterey. 10 p.m. And remember, come alone." The call ended. Clint stared at the screen. This could be a trap, or it could be the break he needed. When Clint stepped into the cafe, the air was thick with ocean mist seeping through the half-open door. A woman with brown hair, wearing sunglasses and a knit cap, sat in the farthest corner. As he approached, she lifted her head, scanning the room before locking eyes with him. "Mr. Eastwood? Who are you?" She pulled down her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes filled with unease. "I'm Catherine Monroe. I used to work in Titan Industries' legal department." Clint pulled out a chair, crossing his arms as he studied her. "So why are you helping me now?" Catherine sighed, staring into her untouched coffee. "I worked for Titan for years. At first, I thought they were just another powerful corporation bending the law to their advantage. But then I realized they weren't just manipulating the system. They were forging documents, bribing officials, and threatening anyone who stood in their way." "Be specific," Clint said, his voice unwavering. Catherine glanced around the cafe one more time before pulling a thick folder from her bag, wrapped carefully. "These are the records I managed to gather. Copies of illegal transactions, internal emails instructing employees to alter land records, and most importantly, Titan's detailed plans to seize Mission Ranch for their resort project, no matter the legal barriers." Clint took the folder and flipped through the first few pages. A map of Carmel caught his eye, with Mission Ranch already marked as Titan's property, before the lawsuit had even begun. He raised an eyebrow. "They decided to take my land long before this fight started, didn't they?" Catherine nodded. "Not just yours. At least 10 other landowners in the area are being targeted. Titan is using the excuse of community development to force small property owners into selling cheap or having their land seized by the local government." Clint narrowed his eyes. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was a full-scale land grab, disguised as progress, backed by money and political influence. Catherine's voice carried a bitter edge. "Coleman doesn't just manipulate politicians. He has people inside the Public Records Office, city planning departments, even surveying firms, altering land ownership files. And if someone refuses to sell, they forge documents to make them look like lawbreakers." Clint took a sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the window. He thought about the false reports in the news, the sudden legal scrutiny over his property. This had all been orchestrated. He set his cup down and turned back to Catherine. "Why are you helping me? You know Titan won't let you walk away from this." Catherine pressed her lips together. "I've stayed silent for too long. But when I saw you standing alone against them, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for all the people who don't have a voice." A heavy silence settled between them. Clint nodded, sliding the folder into his bag. "You did the right thing, Catherine. And now, I'll make sure justice is served." On the drive home, Clint stared out at the coastal road ahead, the ocean stretching endlessly beside him. The salty wind was cold, but inside a fire was burning. This was no longer just his fight. This was a war against the rich and powerful, those who thought they could by the law, bury the truth, and take whatever they wanted. But they had made one fatal mistake. They underestimated Clint Eastwood, and he was about to show them that justice wasn't for sale. Fire, the real battle, was about to begin. Fire. Clint Eastwood's counterattack. Sunlight streamed through the towering windows of the Monterey County Courthouse, casting long shadows over the jury box, where a group of ordinary citizens sat, waiting to deliver a verdict on a case unlike any other. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crowded the hallways, cameras trained on the door, anticipating the arrival of a Hollywood legend, a 94-year-old man who was about to go head-to-head with one of the most powerful corporations in America. Titan Industries had an army of elite attorneys, Clint Eastwood had the truth, and sometimes the truth is all you need. Jonathan Parker, Titan's lead attorney, a sharp-dressed man with neatly combed silver hair, rose from the defense table, a confident smirk on his face. "Your Honor, this case is baseless. Mr. Eastwood, a retired actor, lacks the legal expertise to understand the complexities of land law. What he presents is emotion, not evidence." He turned to Clint, his smile thin and patronizing. "Tell me, Mr. Eastwood, do you have a law degree? Have you ever worked in the legal field?" Clint slowly stood up. No rush. He had faced down worse men than Parker. "No, I've never been a lawyer. But I can read, and I know the truth." Parker chuckled. "And you think you can take down an entire corporation based on documents you gathered yourself?" Clint met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "I don't need to take down an entire corporation. I just need to prove that you broke the law." The courtroom fell silent. Parker, unfazed, pressed forward. "Then prove it, Mr. Eastwood." He called his first witness, Robert Whitaker, Carmel's city planning director, the man who had signed off on the paperwork legitimizing Titan's land seizure. Parker's smirk returned. "Mr. Whitaker, are all documents related to Titan's project legally approved?" Whitaker nodded, his tone steady. "Yes, every document has been reviewed and approved through proper channels." "So, Mr. Eastwood is contesting a legally sanctioned decision?" "That's correct." Parker turned back to Clint, eyes glinting with triumph. "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Eastwood?" Clint stood, walking slowly toward the witness stand. "Just one question, Mr. Whitaker." He pulled out a folder and placed it in front of the witness. "This is the original city zoning record for Mission Ranch from 1982, approved by local authorities. And this," he placed another folder on top, "is the revised document Titan submitted to claim ownership of the land. Do you notice anything different?" Whitaker flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. I'm not sure." Clint reached into his coat, pulling out a magnifying glass, and placed it over a tiny detail on page 3. "Look closely at the seal. What do you see?" Whitaker leaned in. His face paled. "The signature doesn't match." Clint turned to the jury. Titan's paperwork was altered. The legal seal was forged. And this, he held up another folder, is evidence showing that several officials were paid off to approve these fraudulent documents. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Parker clenched his jaw. "This is speculation. You have no proof that Titan directly ordered these changes." Clint smiled. "Oh, I have proof." From his coat pocket, he pulled out a small recording device, raising it for all to see. "This is an internal recording from a Titan Industries meeting." He pressed play. The voice of Richard Coleman filled the room. "The original records are a problem? Get rid of them. I don't care what it costs. Just make sure that when Eastwood gets a court, he owns nothing." The courtroom exploded. The jury looked stunned. Whitaker's face drained of color. Parker froze. Clint walked over to the defense table, placing the recorder in front of Parker. "You want a proof? There it is." Parker, scrambling, turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this recording could have been tampered with. We demand it be dismissed." The judge raised a hand, silencing the noise. "The court will determine the validity of this evidence. In the meantime, we require further witness testimony." Just then, the courtroom doors swung open. Catherine Monroe stepped inside. She walked straight to the witness stand, taking a deep breath before facing the jury. "I work for Titan. I was ordered to alter records, forge documents, and I personally heard Richard Coleman authorize the bribery of officials. I stayed silent for too long. But now, I'm here to tell the truth." At the defense table, Richard Coleman gripped the edge of his chair, his face pale as a ghost. The judge slammed the gavel. "The court will proceed with a full investigation. Effective immediately, Titan Industries must release all documents related to this case." Clint sat back in his chair. He said nothing. He didn't need to, because he knew justice had finally spoken. The final battle was near. Fire. Outside the courtroom, the news spread like wildfire. Titan Industries accused of forging legal documents. CEO Richard Coleman facing possible criminal charges. Clint Eastwood's bombshell evidence shakes the financial world. Sensational headlines flooded every major news outlet. The media dug deeper into Titan Industries, and it didn't take long for them to uncover a disturbing pattern. This wasn't the first time the corporation had used shady tactics to seize land. Within 48 hours of the trial, Titan Industries' stock plummeted. Investors pulled out in droves, wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in a single morning. Rival corporations seized the opportunity, pushing Titan to the brink of collapse. Worse yet, federal agencies stepped in. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission launched a full-scale investigation into Titan's illegal land deals and bribery schemes. The atmosphere inside Titan's San Francisco headquarters was suffocating. Executives sat in a silent conference room, faces pale, phones buzzing nonstop with frantic calls from lawyers and shareholders. But no one was more shaken than Richard Coleman. In his lavish office, Coleman slumped over his desk, gripping an unlit cigar with trembling fingers. He had always believed that Titan was unstoppable, that everything could be bought, from laws to reputations. But this time he was wrong. He looked up at his attorney, Parker, who was sweating as he scrolled through the latest headlines on his phone. "Parker," Coleman's voice was hoarse. "We have to stop this." Parker blinked. "What do you mean?" Coleman clenched his fist. He knew he had no other choice. "Call Eastwood. Offer him a payout. We'll settle this quietly." A few hours later, in a quiet office in Carmel, Clint Eastwood sat across from Parker. A thick envelope lay on the table between them. Parker smirked, sliding it toward Clint. "Mr. Eastwood, Titan Industries is prepared to offer a generous settlement. You take this, and we end everything right here." Clint glanced at the envelope, then slowly looked up, his gaze piercing through Parker. "Let me get this straight. You try to steal my land, threaten me, and when everything fell apart, you think you could buy me off?" Parker forced a chuckle. "You could consider it a token of goodwill." Clint stood, picked up the envelope, and tossed it back onto the table. "Dignity isn't for sale, Parker. I didn't fight this battle for money. I fought it for the truth. And I want Titan Industries to pay for what they did, in public in court." Parker paled. He knew it was over. 3 days later, the final verdict was delivered. The courtroom was packed as the judge faced Richard Coleman, his expression void of sympathy. The court finds Titan Industries guilty of falsifying legal documents, bribing officials, and illegally seizing land. The company is ordered to return all wrongfully acquired properties and pay damages totaling $250 million. Reporters frantically typed notes, cameras flashed. Furthermore, the judge continued, Richard Coleman and several involved officials will face criminal charges for bribery and abuse of power. A wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Coleman sat frozen, while Parker buried his face in his hands. And Clint Eastwood, he simply sat there, arms crossed. No smile, no celebration. He didn't need it. Justice had spoken. A week later, as the dust settled, Clint stood on the hill overlooking his land. It was still here, untouched, unbought, still his. But more importantly, he had done something no one thought possible. Because of this case, other small landowners in town had been saved. Titan Industries was forced to return every stolen property. Corrupt politicians were under investigation. Carmel-by-the-Sea was safe from corporate greed. Outside his ranch, people had gathered. When Clint stepped out, they applauded, not with the empty cheers of a movie premiere, but with the quiet, respectful nods of those who truly understood. An elderly man stepped forward, shaking Clint's hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Eastwood. Not just for Mission Ranch, but for all of us." Clint gave a small nod, his gaze distant. He never wanted to be a hero, but sometimes when no one else stands up, you have to be the one who does. And he did. That evening, as the sun set over Carmel, Clint sat on his porch, a glass of whiskey in hand. He didn't need Hollywood spotlights. He didn't need applause. This wasn't a movie. This was real life. And this time, he wasn't playing a role. He was just himself, Clint Eastwood. Fire justice had won, and it always would. Fire.